Joining us now, I love this man.
Oh, he's great.
You know your son voted for him, right?
Yeah, he's my son, of course.
Okay, Republican representative from Texas, Congressman Ron Paul on the show this morning. And here on the set, host of CNBC's Mad Money, a very, very good-natured Jim Cramer this morning.
Positive.
He's feeling positive.
He's feeling bullish.
Energetic.
Happy money.
Came around and shook
bullish.
everyone's hand, excited about the future.
Well, let's go to the revolution first.
Oh, yeah. Let's start there.
Ron Paul. I was just talking to my good friend Tom Coburn earlier, and of course you and Coburn and myself and some other people fought in the 90s for less government. Then during the Bush era, Republicans spent like never before. But as I said to Tom, and I'll say it to you too, it seems like the world is coming back to you and Tom and other people who've been preaching about small government for a very long time.
At least on the surface, it seems that way, and the rhetoric has changed, and I think it's out of desperation. I think finally the people have awakened, and they know we can't continue to do this, that this deficit and the spending is unsustainable, so people are waking up. But the solutions are yet to be found. I think the sentiment is changing, the talk is different, and that's encouraging, but I still see it an overwhelming task on how we're going to cut back all the spending because everybody has their own special program they will want to protect.
Are you heartened by the debt commission and what they've come up with?
Well, I'm heartened because they're talking about what they should do. I was heartened because they took the suggestion that Barney Frank and I sent to them. We sent a joint letter to them about looking at least at the military. So they're talking about the military. And now I've seen a couple other Republicans that would never say that before are talking about it. But, even that, I'm not reassured totally because I think you have to change the policy. You can't, quit one weapon system and think that's solution if you still want to be the policeman of the world. But the fact that it's out on the table now, I think is very good.
Well, and Ron, that is a bit revolutionary. Republicans that claim to be small government deficit hawks want to stay in Afghanistan for another decade, want to continue every one of these weapon systems. We can't balance this budget. We can't sustain ourselves fiscally if we keep spending money on these two wars and keep spending Pentagon money the way we are, right?
Right. And I think they forgot about Eisenhower. He did leave us with a strong suggestion about watching out for the military-industrial complex. So, no, this cannot work. We have to change our ways, and we have to cut back, and we have to put it on the table. Besides, I think politically, why isn't politically this is a grand move? I mean, how many people here, if the American people were voting, they'd vote $10 billion for building embassies around the world, and we have them all over the place and more bases. You could take $10 billion and say, well, we're coming up short. I don't endorse any of the welfare programs, but I wouldn't be adverse to saying if we could save $10 billion from building embassies, put $5 billion into taking care of the unemployed or medical care benefits to tide us over and put $5 billion against the deficit. To me, that's a political out for us all, but nobody will touch it. Nobody will touch that.
What about $2 billion a week in Afghanistan?
Well, I don't disagree with that.
$2 billion a week in Afghanistan.
Look, what the congressman says makes a lot of sense. He doesn't want to raise the debt ceiling, and the debt commission proposals may be harsh, but there's something that we need to look at as a country, Jim Cramer. How do any of the ideas, though, fly in this economy and in this Washington climate?
I think they only fly as we get closer and closer to the consequences. Dave Cody, who's the CEO of Honeywell, came on our network yesterday, CNBC, and talked about how this stuff is so close. This is not the 30 and 40 years if we don't do something. This is 10 years. It's way too close, and we have got to reach some agreements.
When you say do something, you talking Greece, Ireland?
No,
those sort of meltdowns?
IMF comes here if we don't do this deficit reduction. The IMF is really pretty powerful, and you don't want them in your country. But that's who comes in when you can't pay your debts.
Ron?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great point because it used to be said, and I say it less frequently now, if we continue to do this, all we're doing is dumping this debt on our children and our grandchildren. I don't think that's true anymore. I think Jim's right. It's here.
Now.
I mean, we're in the midst of the crisis.
It's on us. And that is, I talked about what we did in the 90s. The big difference between the 90s and now is, John Heilman, I used to say, we can't strap our children and no, it's us now. I mean, and we do have maybe a decade if we don't clean up our act.
Well, but here's a question. Mika just mentioned the fact that Congressman Paul is in favor of not allowing the debt ceiling to be raised. And that's going to be a big issue coming in the next couple months coming before Congress. I want to ask Jim, master of the money markets, a practical question.
Sure.
So if Congressman Paul has his way, and there are some Tea Party, other members, Tea Party types in the House, let's say the debt ceiling doesn't get extended in January or February when that vote comes up. What happens to the U.S.? What's the scenario that plays out in terms of the U.S. and how in the global financial scenario?
Well, look, that's pretty clear. Same thing if we don't get a deal on tax cuts. We're going to find ourselves back in a recession. We can't afford to slow things down. Look what happened in Europe. They were doing well, and then suddenly some of these countries that we thought were rescued hit a wall. We are in a fragile recovery. It's great. It's lasted so far for 4 weeks. We've had great data. We wipe that out in a nanosecond if we don't get a debt ceiling improvement.
So Ron, reply to that then, Ron. What happens if we don't raise the debt ceiling?
Well, I think it is very serious, but we think the problem is serious. But if we want to say, well, let's just raise the debt limit. I remember when Reagan asked us to raise the debt limit by $50 billion in the first year he was in office. He says, do it. The Democrats ran this up, and this is the last time I'm going to ask you to raise the debt limit. Before he was out of office, he had us raise the debt limit $500 billion in 1 year. Now we raise the debt limit by trillions. Eventually, if we're serious, we do it, and we pay our bills as the income in. But you don't have to pay the Fed interest rates on the debt. I mean, what do we have to do that for? Pay the private owners of debt, but not the Fed. So you could do it, but that would mean that we're serious and we have to cut. But I would agree with Jim. It certainly would shake up the markets. But what will runaway inflation? What will the crashing of the bond bubble do? The crashing of the dollar? That's 10 times worse. And that's what I fear.
That will happen. They will come here. They will come here. The bond vigilante.
By the way, I understand what you guys are saying about not raising the debt ceiling. I understand that. But I remember back in '95 voting against raising the debt ceiling because I was shocked. I was shocked and stunned that it was $5 trillion. That we're going to raise it to $5 trillion. I said, you know what? I'm going to just make a point. I'm going to vote against raising the debt ceiling. Because they said, let's be responsible because you know what? We'll just raise it this time. And then we're in power. That's America. And we're going to do better. And then they raised it to 6. And then they raised it to 7. When I wrote my book in 2004, I said they're now raising the debt ceiling to $7.5 trillion. Who could have ever believed that? Now, Ron, what do they want to raise it to?
Well, it's going at 14 or 15.
6 years later. 6 years later. I could not believe in 2005 that it was $5 trillion. I couldn't believe in 2004 that it was $7.5 trillion. Now we're up to $14 trillion, Ron. Where does it end?
Well, it'll end with runaway inflation, but this is the moral hazard. We always raise the debt limit, and the Fed always monetizes the debt. So deep down in the hearts of all members of Congress, they're not under the pressure to do it. If the Fed couldn't monetize debt and the debt limit couldn't be increased, they say, oh, my goodness, we're going to have to change policies. Maybe we shouldn't be the policemen of the world. Maybe we shouldn't be the endless welfare state. And it will come to an end because when it ends with a dollar crisis, everybody loses. Nobody gets anything, and then there's political chaos, and we're not immune to that. You know, this idea that we won't suffer the same consequences of other nations. Right now, we bail out everybody. When you look at what the Fed did, the announcement yesterday, bailing out foreign banks, we bail out foreign governments. We've already bailed out states, their pension funds to the tune of $40 billion. California's received $8.6 billion, so we're endless. But it all depends on trust in the dollar. One day, the people will wake up and the people of the world will say, why are we trusting this counterfeit machine? The world's biggest counterfeit machine in the history of the world.
Oh, my God.
No, I've got to say, Mika, the arrogance.
Yes,
the
it is arrogance
of our economists.
Yeah, well.
And the arrogance of our academics and the arrogance of American politicians to believe somehow that we are not susceptible to runaway inflation is staggering. It's staggering to people across Europe, in China, across the world. They cannot believe how arrogant we are, that for some reason we escape history in America and inflation doesn't hit. That's just not.
As Larry Summers said to me last night at dinner I went to, if you look at the textbooks, the standard textbooks for economics, they all start the same way, which is that we put in enough rules, enough mechanisms that we'll never have deflation again. We've had deflation for 2 years.
Yeah.
Look at UK. They put through austerity and they've got growth already. Austerity works.
And you're
works.
bullish, by the way, on America.
Are you still happy?
I am bullish because we're hiring. I'm bullish because we might have compromise. I'm bullish because our central bank has credibility. Even though I know Congressman doesn't agree with that.
Ron Paul, thank you very much for being on the show
But
this
Ron
morning.
Paul, you did have
Thank you.
Jim Cramer. I don't know if it's going to be a bumper sticker in the next presidential campaign. He says austerity works.
Did you hear that?
It causes growth. Just got to prune back the tree.
All right, Congressman.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you very much.
It's always great talking to you.